Raise your hand if you've ever heard of Beauty and the Beast. Okay, and keep it raised if you've ever watched the Disney version. Quite a lot of you. I mean, it's a well-known story, right? A young girl taken from her family to live in this unfamiliar place where she meets this mysterious figure who at first she doesn't quite understand, but they fall in love until she loses him, but after suffering and hardship, they're reunited. Familiar, right? I mean, it's Beauty and the Beast. Except it isn't. What I just gave was a brief summary of Cupid and Psyche. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of that story. Well, for those of you who haven't, it's a Roman myth written just under 2,000 years before Beauty and the Beast. And I've drawn your attention to the parallels, but let's recap. We have our beautiful young heroine, our elusive male protagonist, curiosity, suffering, and the eventual triumph of love. Differing details, yes, but the same underlying story. But do we not still consider Beauty and the Beast to be a classic in its own right? I mean, the Disney version is an adaptation of a fairy tale, right? It's not marketed as the modern version of Cupid and Psyche. And you might rightly suggest that's because it's not. It is based on that original Beauty and the Beast. But then surely we have to ask why we don't call this original Beauty and the Beast a retelling too. Because essentially it is, right? What we have is the same central story being told throughout the centuries in different cultures. And why does this continuity matter? Well, in a world increasingly shaped by AI, the conversation is being turned towards this idea of originality. We want innovation and unique ideas, yet the most enduring stories are based on borrowed plots. Their success lies not in their originality, but their adaptability. And the idea that literature is developed from previous works isn't new. As the literary scholar Roland Barthes argues, every text is a tissue of quotations, shaped by countless existing examples. Or, in other words, authors have never created in a vacuum. Take Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, arguably one of the most recognizable texts in the English language. And its plot is borrowed from stories dating as far back as the Greek myth of Pyramus and Thisbe. Again, great works are shaped by transformation. And this is where it becomes even more interesting. Because if stories are being constantly reimagined and reinterpreted, then why are the same plots surviving? What makes them special? Well, Jack Zipes, another literary scholar, suggests it was their ability to remain meaningful in changing societies. They can be adapted to new audiences, new fears, and new values. Their forms and details can shift alongside culture while the central story remains unchanged. So, if we've established that it's reinterpretation that allows for endurance, then let's move away from asking why stories continue to survive, to asking why we continue to tell them. And with that, I think it's time for another story. Raise your hand if you've ever heard of the tale of the bamboo cutter. Well, it's a 10th century Japanese folktale, and it begins when an old and childless bamboo cutter finds this tiny glowing baby inside a bamboo store. And he takes his baby home and begins to raise her with his wife, and they name her Kaguya. And Kaguya grows to be a woman of unearthly beauty, attracting suitors from across the land. But Kaguya is uninterested in marriage, and when these suitors arrive, she sets them impossible tasks. They lie and cheat and ultimately fail. And eventually, Kaguya reveals to her adoptive parents that she is in fact a celestial being exiled from the moon. And the story ends with Kaguya returning to the moon but forced to give up her memories of her life on Earth and those she once loved. I mean, it's a great folktale, right? And despite its celestial and fantastical elements, it's rooted in something deeply human. The moon in the story is held up to be this perfect paradise free from sorrow. Yet, to return there, Kaguya has to give up her memories of both suffering and love. And it's through this mix of emotions, joy and grief, that this story defines what it means to be human. And it's precisely these undeniably human experiences that crop up again and again. Not just in 10th century Japan, but 17th century France, Shakespeare's England, and the modern day. Because while circumstances change rapidly, people don't change quite so quickly. We still fall in love, still fear rejection, still struggle to understand who we are and where we belong. So let's return to the question I asked. Why do we still tell stories? The poet T.S. Eliot argued that great writers don't escape tradition. They enter into conversation with it. And in that sense, stories thrive not on originality, but on adaptability, because adaptability allows for new perspectives. a new way of seeing and a new way of understanding we share in these universal experiences, but our interpretations of them are entirely individual. That's why we have Romeo and Juliet and Pyramus and Thisbe, Beauty and the Beast, as well as Cupid and Psyche. We have never told stories to create something completely new, but to understand which has always been true. And so, originality is about finding individual ways to connect with what we already share. Thank you for listening.